Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or even good night owl. Because I know there are some of us who like to stay up late at night. All of the health experts and doctors who study sleep say it's not a good thing. I was actually talking to one of my sisters earlier about sleep patterns and what certain body functions need to happen at certain times of night. And I've even heard it said that we should be in the bed by the time it turns dark. And but I know 10 o'clock to 6 is what they consider the optimal time of a person getting sleep. And 8 hours is not for everybody. Some people don't function well on 8 hours. They may only be able to function on 6. But I'm not here to talk about that. So whenever you find this video, I hope you can find some value in it. If you do find value, I just ask that you please share it with others so they can find some value. And don't forget that the book, But Hey, What Do I Know, is available directly from me at myranjones@gmail.com. It's also available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. So today I just want to touch on a topic or two or three here. Uh, but if you listen to what I'm going to share, I actually don't have enough time to do this topic justice in one video. And every now and then you will see on the channel I've done some multi-part videos. I'm not a big fan of those, to be honest with you. So I won't be doing a secondary video to this one because it could just go, there's way too much information to cover, even in several part videos. And my experience with multi-part videos is most people won't come back and listen to a part two or part three or four, or however you want to say it. And based on attention span, most people are not going to listen to a 2, 3, 4 hour video. Now, I will do that, but most people in society won't. So I could actually write a book on it, but I'm not certain I want to spend the time to do it. So hopefully you'll listen to what I have to share and do yourself some diligence and study some of this stuff yourself. Because when we think of racism, we must understand it's a modern creation. I've read a lot of books on that. There's one, White Over Black, The Black Image in the White Mind, The End of Racism. There are quite a few. I can't think of all of them right now that I've read over the years. Those are just the ones that popped into the top of my head. But we have to understand that racism is a modern creation. And sadly, most people in society don't even know who created the term. Of people who claim to be so sorely mistreated by the world from their own fabrication are the ones behind the scenes pushing the racism narrative in order to keep blacks and whites at odds with one another so they can continue to push their agenda. Andrew Hacker said that everybody of Caucasian descent believes that they belong to a superior strain. Now, Mr. Hacker is actually a white guy. He has actually written an eye-opening book as well, and I've read the book, or one of them anyway. I can't even think of the name of it right now. And it's not just lost on my mind. I just read a lot, and so I don't really need to remember the names. I just need to remember the content. But after having some conversations with some of my Asian Indian associates, I've also found out that many of them don't just hold disdain for blacks. They also hold disdain for darker skinned Asian Indians. But you know what? You see, a lot of history doesn't get told because we always say the victors always write the history to favor themselves. But Marco Polo, during his travels, said that the people called the Dravidians would actually anoint their babies with sesame oil to make their skin darker. because they felt that darker skinned people were closer to God because they knew God was black. Hey, I didn't say it. Marco Polo did. So take it up with him. As a matter of fact, let me pull the exact word from Polo. Give me a minute, second, whatever. Okay, here it is. It's a fact that in this country, when a child is born, they anoint him once a week with oil of sesame, and this makes him grow much darker than when he was born. For I assure you that the darkest man is here, the most highly esteemed, and considered better than those who are not so dark. Let me add that in very truth, these people portray and depict their gods and idols black and their devils white as snow. For they say that God and all the saints are black and the devils are white. And so that's what Marco Polo had to say. Ancient Chinese were a highly xenophobic people, especially because they considered their middle kingdom as the center of the universe. You see, everybody wants to be the blessed seed, but nobody wants to experience the curses that the blessed seed had to go through. They want all the trappings of God's blessings, but in essence, they want the childbirth without the birth pains. The Chinese were also hostile toward all of the peoples of the Asian cultures. Chinese people felt that they were superior to everyone Asian, black and white. And ironically, an early Chinese traveler said they actually considered black to be the most beautiful. I mean, and look at it now. Homer said that blacks were blameless of the gods. Diodorus said that blacks had a widespread reputation for religious piety. Seneca said blacks were known for their courage and their love of freedom. I mean, and look at us today as black people. We say we want freedom, but we're doing everything our government master tells us to do that's going to put us in bondage. I mean, we have a major disconnect with freedom nowadays. And Miles Monroe said, I think in his book, Burden of Freedom, that freedom requires responsibility. And what I found, there's a lot of people that don't want to be responsible. Lucian, another guy, said that blacks were the wisest of men. Herodotus, y'all have heard me mention him before, said blacks were the most handsome of men. And I mean, if all of these people in history felt this way, how did we get so far off track? It goes back to what I said earlier about who's pushing the racism narrative. But right now, right today, based on what's transpired over the past few weeks or so, we keep hearing, let's stop the Asian hate. And I mean, I believe we shouldn't be hating on anybody. I believe we should hate evil. We should hate what God hates. But I don't think we should hate people. That's just me. And I don't care what color they are, because I believe we were put here to love. Love your neighbor as yourself. I think that was the second commandment Christ gave after he said, love God. He said, love, and then he said, love your neighbor as yourself. And we're not seeing a lot of love. So we're seeing all of these sayings. We're seeing newscasters promoting. We're seeing it over the internet. We're seeing it over social media. We're seeing the signs everywhere, the banners everywhere. Let's stop Asian hate. Yet, Asians have been mistreating blacks for a long time. And this is just one example. I think one of the greatest forms of disrespect is when they're communicating in their language when we're supporting their business. And they sit there and talk in their language to one another while you're sitting there. But when they take your money, all of a sudden they know how to speak English. I mean, that's the ultimate disrespect to me. I'm not going to do business with you again. There's an airline I won't ever fly again because of an incident that happened. I was coming back out of, flying back out of Richmond, Virginia one year. And I walked into the counter and there were two ladies from another country. And then they started to communicate with one another in their language. And me being who I am, in the politest way I could, I said, don't talk that stuff when I'm up here. You speak in English when you have an English speaking customer up here. Don't do that. And they immediately just stopped talking altogether, wouldn't even talk to me. But I don't care. I handled my transaction and I walked off. But I did report the incident to the airline because I felt it was disrespectful, especially when you're in a service industry. Hey, I worked service industries for a long time. And whether you believe it or not, even if you work in a job by yourself, you still work in a service industry. So I let the airline know. So how did we as black people, according to all of these historians, all of these philosophers, all of these cultures around the world, go from being the closest to God, the most intelligent on the planet, and the best looking, to the scum of the earth according to today's society? It goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning. A group of people had to make us look bad. A group of people told society that the black-skinned people were cursed forever. They even put it in their religious book. You figured it out yet? Let me say this. The people behind racism have been kicked out of over 130 countries worldwide because of their wickedness. And as much as society frowns upon a black face, we have never been kicked out of an entire country. We may have been forced out because of theft and colonization, but we were never kicked out because of our wickedness. Historians have tried to prove that ancient Egyptians were not black in order to discredit the black face as builders of civilizations. But they also try to hide because what they want to do, they want to discredit the black Egyptian face because the Bible says Mary and Joseph took Christ, Yeshua, down to Egypt to hide him from Herod. So if Mary and Joseph took Yeshua down to Egypt to hide him from Herod, that meant they could blend in. And the only way they could blend in is if they were the same color. Follow what I'm saying? See, I've even had that's why they try to, you got these people, even pastors, tell you, well, Jesus was Middle Eastern. Well, let me bust your bubble right quick. There was no such thing as the Middle East until they built the Suez Canal. So Jesus wasn't Middle Eastern. And if you study geography, you understand that Israel is part of the tectonic plate that connects to Africa, not Asia, not Europe. So there was no such thing as the Middle East when Yeshua walked the earth. Go study that in your history book. See, if we're going to study history, we would have to understand that today's Egyptians are Turkish descendants from the Ottoman War. There was also a guy named Strabo. I mean, that's an interesting name, Strabo. And he said that the most barbaric people in the world were the Irish. Now, that's not me, that's Strabo. So just like I told you about taking it up with Polo, take it up with Strabo. It's going to be kind of hard because both of them dead. Martin Bernal said that although Greeks had actually accomplished a lot, they were most respectful of the Ethiopians. What color are Ethiopians? Ironically, all of the Greek so-called intellect was actually stolen from black people. Back then, the so-called Greek philosophers will actually be killed for teaching those things from the black cultures. The things that the black cultures were teaching and educating and building cities and all that. Greek philosophers would be killed. That's why a lot of them ran, because they were running to save their lives, because their own people didn't want to hear that stuff coming from the black civilizations. I mean, if you want a real good history on that, get Richard Poe's book, Black Spark, White Fire. Don't take my word for nothing. I always tell you that. Greeks also considered Europeans to be lacking in rudiments of civilization. A guy named Edward Gabin said that those same Snow White, barbarians would eventually plunder and destroy the Greco-Roman civilization. Another guy, Plutarch, talked about a case of a Greek woman whose black baby caused her to be accused of adultery. And it was found that she was actually the great-granddaughter of an Ethiopian. I mean, most of y'all, well, all of y'all come from dark skin somewhere. All of y'all. And the quicker you admit that, the better off you're going to be. Interracial marriage was actually not even a thing. I mean, I'm not going to say not a thing. It wasn't frowned upon way back then like it was during periods in this country, our more modern country. See, we want to say we the most civilized nation of all time, but we backwards in a whole lot of stuff. Interracial marriage was something that was practiced all over the place. You remember Moses married the other woman from another tribe? That went on all over the place. See, Bible historians in seminary and pastors try to tell you Miriam and Aaron got mad at Moses because he married a black woman. No, if you read and understand your Bible properly, they got upset because he married a woman from another tribe because Moses was black. The Bible tells you the tribe of Levi was black. So if Moses came through the tribe of Levi, what color did he have to be? He was raised, his mother put him out there on the river. He was picked up by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in Pharaoh's house. That's in Egypt. Egypt was black. Okay? Judah was black. The tribe of Judah was black. Christ, Yeshua, came through the tribe of Judah, down from David and Bathsheba. I mean, be honest about it. With a name like Bathsheba, what color you think she is or was? Come on, be honest about it. The whole book of Solomon, which is a love story, all it talks about is skin color. So how Christ gonna be Middle Eastern when all his forefathers were black? See, the problem a lot of so-called Christians are having is they can't stand the fact that the Lord's son is a black man. And under no circumstances are they gonna worship a black man. They'll worship somebody as long as they think he's Middle Eastern or tan, but they don't want to worship no black man. Amazingly, same people who rather worship somebody with the Middle Eastern skin tone are also the biggest haters of the people that society and the governments have told us are terrorists. So your thinking is all messed up. You hate Middle Easterns over here, but you love this Middle Eastern. But I already told you he ain't Middle Eastern. So, and like I mentioned, Christianity is actually a more modern creation too. It was actually called the Way, W-A-Y. And the people who followed the Bible were called the followers of the Way. So, I've been studying that. I'm going to do more study over that. I might talk about that at a later date. But the hatred for interracial marriage was a modern creation created within the last couple centuries. Okay, I believe it might have been in the 1800s. I can't remember the exact date, but I have it written down somewhere the exact date the term actually came into being. But we don't even know, because the school system won't teach it, that medieval Europeans believed there were wild men who lived in trees. I guess that's why they got the Tarzan story from. But even that great discoverer of inhabited lands, Christopher Columbus, that y'all celebrate every year, thought he was going to find people who were born with tails. Now, some of you may have heard that white men actually told their daughters to stay away from black men because they had tails like monkeys. Well, we know what they were actually talking about. And there were actually other white explorers who carried the same thought process. A guy named Walter Raleigh, Francisco de Orellana, and John Swan, with just a few other names. And there was a geographer named al-Bakri, and he said this about the Galatians. Now, when we think of Galatians, we think about the book of Galatians in the Bible, but the Galatians were a people. The Ephesians were a people. The Romans were a people. The Corinthians were a people. The Thessalonians were people. Okay? Philippians were people. Okay? But al-Bakri studied this stuff, okay? And he said the Galatians are treacherous, dirty, and they bathe about once or twice a year. And then when they bathe, they do it with cold water. He said they never wash their clothes until they're worn out because they claim the dirt accumulated as a result of the sweat softens their body. I mean, but y'all, as society, talk about black people? Hey, I'll be honest with you. My wife told me I'm a little touched in the head because sometimes I'll take 3 or 4 showers a day. I can't stand the smell of dirt. I can't stand the smell of sweat. I mean, I'm not able to cut my grass right now, but when I was cutting my grass, I would actually take a shower before I cut my grass. And my wife said, something wrong with you. You taking a bath to go out and sweat. And I told her, I said, yeah, because when my body's clean, the sweat comes out a little bit cleaner. And she said, okay, whatever. And there was an Arab scholar named Said al-Andalusi. And this is what he had to say about white people as well. He said, their temperaments are frigid. And I'm paraphrasing. And their humor's raw. He said they lack keenness of understanding and clarity of intelligence. And they overcome by ignorance and dullness. They have a lack of discernment and they stupid. Now, my wife don't like me to say that word, but that's what Andalusi said. I didn't see it this time. And there's a writing called Comprehensive Multicultural Education. And there was a lady named Christine Bennett. And she said there's evidence to prove that Africa was as advanced or even more advanced than contemporary Europeans. Now, if Africa is the mother of all civilization, I mean, she should have said it a different way. She should have said Europeans might have been as advanced as Africa because Africa is the birthplace of civilization. And I mean, even I've come across information that Africa is not originally the name of that continent. I don't know. I know they said that African name came from a Roman general. So that's possible, but I've come across a lot of information that Africa is really not the true name. Now, when we think about slavery in this country, all we think about is white people owning slaves. And white people were not the biggest slave owners in this country. Not the white people we think about anyway. Jews own slaves in this country. Whites own slaves in this country. Choctaw Indians own slaves and black slaves. And I'm talking about black slaves. I'm not talking about each other. Chickasaw Indians own black slaves. Cherokee Indians own black slaves. Creek Indians own black slaves. And even the Seminoles own slaves. And then later on, mulattoes and other free blacks also owned slaves. A lot of them did by family members, but a lot of them got in it for the profit-making ability as well. Now, you know, my video on this channel, Free Blacks Who Own Slaves, you know, I get a lot of people, and you can go look in the comments yourself, and they tell me how wrong I am talking about Anthony Johnson wasn't the first slave owner. I know Anthony Johnson wasn't the first actual slave owner. He was the first legal slave owner. Now, study that and put that in your pipe and smoke it. He was the first legal slave owner that said you could be enslaved for the entirety of your existence on earth. He was the first one that ever got that granted to him. So I guess I didn't make that clear enough in the Free Blacks Who Own Slave video. And I'm not going back and argue with these people about that. I've done my research. They just need to do theirs. But see, part of the problem is we don't like to believe that we are just as vile and evil as other folks. Now, Cherokees actually own other Indians as well, other Cherokee Indians and from others, but they would eventually free all of their Indian slaves, but they kept all the black ones. Cherokees were considered the greatest trackers of the time, and they would actually offer their tracking services to white slave owners to catch the black runaway slaves for them. The Choctaw Indians offered to fight with the South during the Civil War. If they offered to fight with the South during the Civil War, guess what they wanted to keep intact? Slavery of black folks. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, the Choctaw Indians didn't even want to end their ownership of their black slaves. They actually had to sign a treaty with the government out of reluctance to suspend the practice of owning slaves. See, history ain't teaching you that. But I keep telling y'all, everybody that masquerades as our friend ain't our friend. Yet we go to bat for everybody else, but we won't go to bat for ourselves. In 1989, that was actually the year I graduated high school, a Palestinian guy, dad, named Zane Issa, murdered his own daughter for dating a black guy. 1989. There was a television miniseries titled Sadat, and it was banned in Egypt because the people in Egypt didn't like the idea that Louis Gossett was cast in the role because he was black. Amazingly, Gossett actually looked just like the late president Anwar Sadat. But see, they keep trying to wipe away that black existence. But the system all around the world keep trying to do whatever it can to wipe out any traces of true black history from the books. That's why you have to go find those books that's not in print anymore. Oh, I have a whole lot of books. If I don't have 1,000, I got high hundreds worth of old books that had been archived. They're in digital format, and I can read that way too. But as black people, we go to work in other companies and we empower the people who start those companies. But the moment someone like me said, let's build our own companies and employ our own people, all of a sudden my focus is misplaced. Why is it okay for other people to build companies, to employ people, and we go to work for those people? But it's always a problem when someone like me proposes that we build our own. There are people in society who actually classify someone like me as a reverse racist because I promote the idea that we have no economic power or foundation as a people, and I'm promoting building something for ourselves. What kind of thinking is that? I live in Houston. Houston is a huge city. I think it's been running along for the longest as the fourth largest city in this country. I've been in Houston all my life. And we have areas where there's a heavy Jewish concentration with economics. We have areas where there are heavy concentrations of Hispanic economic power bases, Caribbean power bases, Chinese power bases, Korean power bases. So how is it okay for all of these groups of people to have their own, but it's not okay for us to have our own? And yes, I know I mentioned Africans, but society does not consider the African and the Black American as the same people. Now, we came from the same continent, but we're not the same people. As a matter of fact, in record, the Bible doesn't even classify the Black Americans and Africans as the same people. I've talked about that before. Said Ham is the progenitor of all of the darker races except the Negro. Well, who's the Negro? That's the Black American and a few others around the world, but more so the Black American, those that came over during the slave trade, because in reality, about 95% of the people that were sent here were actually Black Hebrews. They were not Black Africans as we know it. When they ran out of Hebrews, this is historical records from old books too that are no longer in print. Dr. Alexander Falconbridge, who was a doctor on one of the slave voyages and quit as soon as he got back, because he said he couldn't work in a practice like that. He said after they ran out of Hebrews, they started capturing Africans. And he said that was only about 5% of them. So, like I said, don't take my word. Nothing. Go find it. Now, it's one thing for others in the government to do whatever they can to block our progress as a people, but it's an entirely different thing when we become our own worst enemy. Far too many of us have adopted the same mindset as those blacks who said that we shouldn't focus on building an economic base and work to integrate into a system that actually hasn't totally treated us fairly when it's come to opportunity. And I talk a lot about that on the last video. Can we do it is not the question. And I don't bite my tongue with who I'm talking about. And we, for some reason, we keep complaining of the system, but we always look to the black leaders that the system tells us to look to. And we look past the black leaders who the system tells us to marginalize. See, those guys we look to in the past and those people we look into now are the ones that the system put in place for us to recognize as our leadership. Why are we the only people on the planet that always need a leader? Name a white leader. Name a Korean leader. Name a Jewish leader. Name an African leader. Name a Caribbean leader. Name a Korean leader. Name a Chinese leader. Name an Indian leader. If you can't name them, why do black people need one all the time? The government always tells us who our leader should be. We always need to be led like we're little children. And we ain't figured that out yet. But the system hasn't treated us fairly. That's why they did everything they could to discredit a guy like Booker T. Washington, a guy like Philip Payton, a guy like Kelly Miller, a guy like Reginald Lewis, a guy like S.B. Fuller, a guy like A.G. Gaston. The system even told us to look past Adam Clayton Powell because he was a womanizer. But the same system also told us to look toward Martin Luther King, who was also a womanizer. So the system tries to make sure we stay away from the people that's trying to help us empower ourselves and try to get us, and they don't try to get us, they get us to follow people who have never built anything, who said themselves in their words that they don't want to give the impression to white people that we want to be segregated by having our own businesses. And that's who the system tells us to look to. But don't look to Booker T. Washington. Don't look to his teaching. Oh, he met with Theodore Roosevelt in the White House. He ain't meaning us no good as black folks. Booker T. Washington helped more black people create economic empowerment than anybody else in this country. But we were told to ostracize him. And as soon as he died, the NAACP and W.E. Du Bois went into full throttle to destroy what he had created. But I'm not here to talk about all that. I just kind of got off on that. It burns me up. But we bought into the mindset that of those blacks who said we should focus on building an economic base, we should work hard to integrate into a system that hasn't treated us fairly at all. We're still complaining about police brutality. Right now, what we got going on is the George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, or however you say his name, trial. And now you got these experts trying to paint George Floyd as the bad guy, saying he had heart issues and he had a history of drug use. Well, but they're trying to minimize that knee on his neck for 9 minutes. How about you let somebody put their knee on Chauvin's neck for 9 minutes? That'd be a better trial than what he's going through now. So we're still not being treated fairly through this system. But they want to keep telling us things have gotten better. And I mean, they have, but we're still battling the same issues that we were battling What's that? 36 and 21. What's that? 57 years ago, when the Civil Rights Act was signed, we're still battling the same thing. Home ownership in 1968 was 41.7%. Black home ownership, that is. Black home ownership today is 42.7%. Is that an advancement? Black unemployment back then was 6.7%. Black unemployment today is 7.5%. Well, 2018 was what I saw last week. We're not going to count right now because the COVID got everybody all messed up. So we're not going to even talk about right now. That was 2018 numbers. So we're still no better than we were almost 60 years ago. Now, speaking of that, many blacks have told me I have no experience with racism and discrimination because of the position I've taken over the years. Because I will acknowledge that it exists, but I will also acknowledge that I don't let it define me. So, since they say I don't have any experience with it, let me give you some of my experience. My first time getting promoted into management, retail management, me and a white guy were promoted to the same management position on the same day at the same exact time out of the same store. I was left at the store we occupied, we were working at already, which was the second highest volume store in the city of Houston at the time. They sent me to get trained for 2 days with the guy at the highest volume store in the city. He was also a white guy. At 5 o'clock each day, I left and went back to the store I was working at, and I would work until 11 o'clock each night. Guess what the white guy did? He called the district manager and told him that I like to watch the clock. Now, the district manager said that doesn't even sound like Myron, because my experience with Myron is Myron's always been one to come in early and stay late. He said, so that doesn't even sound right. And what he was trying to do, because he was their top dog, he was their boy. He was trying to get me to catch up on all of his paperwork that he was behind on, and I told him I wasn't going to do it, and he got upset. So the guy called in on me and told him I like to watch the clock because I told him I wasn't doing his work. Now, ironically, I got wrote up just a little bit over a month later because I was behind on paperwork from the 3 previous managers that were in a position before me, but I'll get to that a little bit. But the guy that actually got promoted with me the same day, he was sent to a brand new store. And this store didn't generate much revenue. It was on the outskirts of town. There wasn't much urbanization out there at the time. And so he had it kind of easy. I was kind of through in the fire because, like I said, I had 2 days of training. I was left at the store that had 3 failed managers who had left a lot of bad paperwork and a lot of missing inventory. And my first full inventory was the first time in that store's history where the store was not missing any of the big ticket electronic items. The white guy who got promoted the same day with me at the same time, he actually left the company a couple of months later. And he went to another store, whole nother company after a couple of months. A few months later, he came back. Now get this. He came back into a higher management position while I was still stuck in the same one. I was loyal to the company, and he got promoted. Then guess what happened? A few months later, he left the company again. I continued on with the company, and we were remodeling the store, so we hired a temporary crew to help us remodel the store. And that was pretty standard when in all my experience of working retail and things like that, when we do stuff like that, we'd always hire a temporary crew. And one of the guys that hired on that temp was kept and hired full time, which was customary in the time we had store remodels. You always try to find out the people that might benefit you and are good workers. And later on, he would be promoted to a management position, and they sent him to me to be trained. Not long after that, guess what happened? He was promoted to a higher position than me. I knew his background. I knew his work experience. And I called the district manager about this. Now, this wasn't the same district manager that promoted me, because I believe if he'd have stayed around, uh, I would have probably advanced. And that district manager was actually a white guy. And it was a white guy before him that didn't see a need to ever promote me. And so the new district manager was a Hispanic guy. And I called him. And I asked him, I said, how does a guy with his experience get trained by me and then leapfrog me? He told me he thought I could work harder than I was already doing. I was already working from can't see to can't see. Sometimes starting my work day at 5 in the morning and getting off at 11 at night. But you know what? I enjoyed the work. My dad always taught me to work hard. And as I got older, he said, you need to learn how to stop working so hard and start working smart. I enjoyed the people I worked with. I enjoyed the customers that I served. And the most important thing, I met this beautiful woman at the company. And I still got her. She ain't going nowhere. I got her. She mine. But a manager in another city had actually called me directly. And this was somebody I knew within the company. And she had actually asked me to transfer and work as part of her management team in another city. And like I said, I had worked with her before. And I would actually love to work with her again, but I wasn't interested in driving an hour and a half each way to get to and from work every day. And I'm working 6 days a week. And I wasn't going to find a place to live in that city because I didn't want to stay there. So I continued on at the store I was at, and I eventually asked for a transfer to the highest volume store in the city because the other guy was gone by that time. They sent him to one of the real bad stores since he was supposedly so good. And he quit about a month or two after they sent him there because he couldn't handle a bad store. And then come to find out he had been stealing a lot of the big ticket items. But you know what? No prosecution because they always wanted to keep the white boys protected. Hey, I'm just telling you my experience. They did those things. And so the head manager was wanting me to work with him over at that high volume store. He had watched my work ethic and thought I would be an excellent addition to his management team. I called the district manager and he said no. I only asked for a lateral move and he said no. A few more months went by and I submitted my resignation. Now, it was at this moment that the district manager all of a sudden acted like I had value. He then asked if he transferred me to a store of my choosing, would I stay? In a move that had never been done in the history of the company in the 7 years I worked there, they sent the corporate human resource manager to do my exit interview. They had never done an exit interview for no manager at any level before. But they knew they had messed over me. And they were scared I was going to file a lawsuit. The district manager called me the day before the HR manager had arrived and asked if I would reconsider my resignation. Like I said, all of a sudden I have value now. I told him it all depended on what the HR manager said. After the exit interview, the DM called me and he asked how it went. And this was on a Wednesday morning. And the exit interview took 4 hours. And I told him my last day is Friday. Something else had also taken place. The head manager that was working with me was a Hispanic female. Out of 4 managers, I lived the closest to the store. When the Stockton crew wanted to go in early to get work done while no customers were in the store, I would volunteer since I was normally the opening manager anyway. I would actually help the guys in their work, and when it came close time for the store to open, I would go and prepare for the opening. Well, a few mornings that we went in, I noticed a vehicle cross on the other side of the parking lot. And this was very strange to me because in all my years, I had never seen a car park across the parking lot at any of those other stores at that time. 5 in the morning, none of the other stores had any people going in. We had been working there for years, We practically, all the managers and staff at all the stores pretty much knew each other. We knew each other's vehicles, so it wasn't anybody in one of those stores. And there was a black Acura Legend, parked across the parking lot. And I found out not long after who was driving that car. The head manager had actually called loss prevention and told them that me and the guys were stealing out of the store, and that's why I volunteered to help the guys early in the morning. And so I didn't recognize the loss prevention manager's vehicle because he drove a green Ford F-150. The Acura was actually his wife's car. So after my resignation, I contacted every black manager in the Houston area because I was going to file a lawsuit against the company. Every time they moved a black person, they would give them a raise and then make a lateral move. So if they ever got caught, they could say that they actually promoted them because they gave them a raise. Not one white or Hispanic person ever had this happen to them. Not one. In all my years, in all 7 years, that had never happened. I had actually set the appointment with the EEOC. I sat in my car in downtown Houston until the very last minute as I waited for all of these guys to show up. Guess how many showed up? Did you get 0? That's right. I met with the EEOC by myself. I was called back in at a later date by the EEOC, and the company had provided one review that wasn't up to par out of my 7 years. And the one review they provided was the one that the internal auditor had given me about a month after I got promoted, trying to clean up the other 3 guys' mess. Remember I told you about that paperwork earlier? So I got wrote up trying to clean up other people's mess because for some mysterious reason, this internal auditor never came in with the previous 3 managers. But all of a sudden, here come Myron, and now she shows up. So anyway, I had kept every review I had ever gotten. As a matter of fact, I just threw them away a few years ago. And I left the company back in 1997. The gentleman at the EEOC had given me the right to sue. But I'll talk about that a little later. I took another job, and one day I was working in another city and ran into that same district manager, a Hispanic guy, in a store in a northern city further up from Houston. And so we saw each other, and I'm a cordial person, so I stopped to talk with him. He said, Myron, I know we had our differences on you being promoted, and I would love to have you come back. And he kept talking and said, I know you wanted to advance, but I could bring you back in the same position that you left in until one of the other management positions opened up. He said, I could really use your experience. And I replied, and I told him, it's obvious that you and I still have a communication problem. To even offer to bring me back in the same capacity that I left is an insult. I then said at the time, I actually wanted to advance my career with this company, but I'm not at this stage of my life anymore. I don't want to give all my time to a job like I once did. I'm married now, and I like spending time with my wife. I like cutting my grass when the sun is still out. And that's why I left the conversation. And another job, people would quit all the time. And I would always get the call to help the company out. It didn't matter if they needed me to travel to Mississippi, Louisiana, South Texas, or North Texas. I was always willing to help because I believe in being a team player. But I found out in my working career, and even now, there are a lot of people who don't like to be team players. It's like they want to get all they can, and then they want to sit on the can. They don't want, they all in it for themselves. And I was the person they called when someone needed to be trained in all of those areas, even down in Laredo, Texas. And if any of you know anything about Laredo, Texas, it's not the safest place to be at night. And I was always a hard worker, but I love to make my work as easy as possible. And I was having an issue with a manager, and I told my direct boss about it. I told him she was always wanting me to do things that belonged to another company, and I would be respectful, but she always had a nasty tone when she talked to me. So I asked him to get that store to someone else, and he never would, saying that he didn't have anybody to cover it. Now, I knew he did because I trained the people they hired. So he left it to me. He left the store to me. His boss actually came in town one day and met me at another store I was working with. We had tracking mechanism before it became popular today. And they knew where we were at all times because of the system. And so my boss's boss even complained about me logging in from the store I was working in because that's how we had to log in. We had to call in from the store phone and let them know we were there. And so his boss complained about me logging in through the store phone that they told me to use to log in and said, everybody else seems to be okay, but for some reason, yours always seems to be a problem. And I said, well, man, I said, am I logging? I said, is it showing me calling in from the phone at the store? The store's number? He said, well, yeah. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, I don't know. It's just something wrong about the way you doing it. So he's a white guy. My direct boss is a white guy. And so I don't hate to say this, but because he was a jackass who happened to be white. And he said, I just see you logged in, but something isn't right about your login. I asked what that meant. I asked did he show me in and out and logged in and out when I took lunch breaks. He said yes, but something still ain't right about your login. Now I had been on conference calls with this guy before, and the way he talked to people, I just couldn't believe people allowed another human being to talk to him this way just to keep a job. And kind of like people do today, let their boss talk to them any kind of way just because they think they need a job. Hey, what's more important, your job or your dignity? I mean, there are a lot of jobs out there, even in spite of what we're dealing with right now. But if you allow people to get away with talking to you and treating you like this, it's hard to come back and fix that later. You set that precedent up front. You let people know they're not going to talk to you that way. And so we're in the middle of a store, and he starts to go off on me. And I let him finish. And when he did, I politely told him, you and I are both grown men. We both put our pants on one leg at a time. And we're both going to respect each other. I said, whatever tone you speak to me in, I want you to know I will return that tone back to you. And I mean, you should have seen the look on my direct boss's face when I said that. Because my direct boss was a wimp of a man. And he just let people talk to him any kind of way. And even though he was a wimp, I still respected him because he was my boss. And so he looked at my boss like, who does this Negro think he is? But I'm pretty sure that's not the N word he was thinking. But you see, my boss knew me before we worked at that company. So he knew I meant what I said when I said it. His boss even told me in that store he wanted to fire me, but my boss had told him no. I told him, man, that talk don't scare me. Do what you have to do. He didn't. And he also didn't raise his voice to me anymore either. From that point forward, anytime my boss and his boss would ask for my help, I told them no. My boss eventually quit and a new guy was hired. Guess who the top boss asked to train him? Now, guess what happened after that? After working for a few months with this new guy, something started happening every week that had not happened in the prior 7 years. 7 years always seemed to be like my time frame before I left the company. But I had also trained a friend of the new boss, and he lived in Houston, but as a single guy, he loved to travel and drive, so he covered the Louisiana territory. For some reason, we could never keep help over in the Louisiana area anyway. I spent a lot of time over in southern Louisiana. And so Hurricane Katrina hit, and every store he covered in South Louisiana was destroyed. So he didn't have any work. He didn't have any more stores, so guess what started happening? I started getting complaints all of a sudden from all the black managers of the stores I serviced. His friend needed work, so he started to squeeze me. I personally knew how I had been treated as a black manager, so I did a little extra for the black managers to try to help them. I did what I could to make all of the stores I served look good, but I knew the black managers had a much harder time than everybody else. My boss would visit the stores, and he started wanting me to report every little thing I did to him. If I ordered a nail for a desk, I needed to let him know. And when that nail came in, I needed to let him know the nail came in. That's just how much he was scrutinizing and micromanaging me at that point. He started going to the stores asking the managers about their relationship with me. And only one white manager had something negative to say, and ironically, that manager that had never worked with me. That was a black manager at that store who always worked with me, and for some reason, his input was never considered. Me and that guy had worked together for years. And if I didn't show up on a day at the time that he was used to me showing up, he would call and check on me to see if I was coming. So his input wasn't even considered when he was checking on me. I had 47 stores that I serviced at the time. So my boss kept asking around and found a few black managers who were willing to throw me under the bus. Sadly, those that threw me under the bus were the ones I watched and went above and beyond for. Other than a white woman, all of these guys were black. One guy I did watch, he finally got a breakthrough and advanced from the lower rungs of the ladder. And I was so happy for him. Because this was actually, I was servicing these stores where I had once been a manager for. This guy that I was really proud for, and I always talked to him, and I always did, I think, a little bit more for him because he was a newbie. He told my boss I didn't do anything that I was supposed to do when I came into his store. This was the same guy that would call me when he had a visit from the higher ups coming in to make sure I was going to visit his store before the day so he could look good to them. And I always wanted to make sure he looked good, and I was granting that. I wanted to help him. This guy and I always communicated, and as I stated, I appreciated what he was able to accomplish. So when I got the write-up for his store, that stunned me. My boss took 41 stores from me to give to his friend because my reputation, work ethic, and relationship was so bad with those managers, according to him. I called the guy that I watched advance, and I told him about the write-ups. And I told him, I said, I was quitting. And he said, I'm sorry to hear that, Myron. I said, I find that hard to believe since one of the complaints came from you. He said, Myron, I got to go. I lost 41 stores because 3 black managers out of the 47 stores said something negative about me. And I saw the write-ups. Those guys talked about me bad. The even sadder thing was none of that stuff they told him was true. I already mentioned that the black managers never met me at the EEOC. Well, as Paul Harvey would say, here's the rest of the story. I met with some attorneys that own their own law firm. These were 2 black guys. Hey, I'll be honest with you. I try to support black, and I don't think anything's wrong with that. I walked in, and in less than 5 minutes, the guy told me it would be a $10,000 retainer. I told him, okay. He then asked me, do you have it? I said, yeah. And I went through some other things to prepare for my lawsuit. I had not hired these guys yet. Once I felt I was ready to proceed, I called and I set up another appointment. I went to the office, and the guy I was expecting to meet with had left for the day, although he set the appointment with me. Disrespect. The first thing out of his partner's mouth was, do you have your retainer? I said, yes, but I'm not giving it to you. I told him not one time have either one of you ever said, we have a strong case or we have a weak case. The only thing y'all want to know is if I have the retainer. And then he told me, well, discrimination cases are hard to prove. I got up and walked out. Here recently, it came out that one of the Black Lives Matter founders bought her $1 million home in a white neighborhood. You know, that's typical behavior of a lot of black people, past and present, who tell the rest of us that we're oppressed and they're fighting for us. White people are so bad according to these types of blacks, but they move as close to white people as they can, as fast as they can. Proverbs 3:31 says to not envy your oppressor and don't choose to be like him. But these black folks are doing the exact opposite. See what Attorney Donald Ward had to say about MLK. See what Stokely Carmichael had to say about the Civil Rights Crew. See what Adam Clayton Powell had to say about the Civil Rights Crew. Don't take my word for it. What did Malcolm X say about the Civil Rights Crew? So I have experienced racism and discrimination, just like many of you. I don't let it define me. Has it bothered me? Yes. I mean, just even talking about the guy I watched advance and reliving that experience choked me up. But racism is born out of ignorance and evil. Discrimination is born out of ignorance. Self-hate is born out of ignorance and hatred of self. You know why I don't fixate on racism and discrimination? Because I have met more people with good hearts than people with evil hearts, from all colors. Fixating on racism saps a lot of energy from us, and we need to recognize that. Has it disappeared? No. But each individual person who lives with that mentality has to fix it themselves. No legislation is going to fix it. I don't care what the Civil Rights Act said. I don't care what affirmative action said. Legislation don't fix that stuff. You can't fix a heart problem. That's individual. That's personalized. I don't care what the government said. Government can't fix your heart. No punishment or jail time is going to fix racism. The thing that fixes it is, first of all, getting your vertical alignment proper. God, Elohim, Yeshua, and you. You get that right. Then you teach your kids right, so they understand that every person, regardless of color, has value. It's amazing that our kids of all colors can play with one another as kids, but we started conditioning them the older they get that there's certain people they're supposed to hang with. Like Eleanor Roosevelt said, some of my best friends are Negro, but y'all love Eleanor. So you got to teach your kids that every person has value. Even if you harbor racism as an adult, you can cleanse your heart and put that lifestyle behind you. My wife and I went to meet with a guy and his wife one evening. This was some years ago, about an hour away from Houston. And at the time, you know, I didn't know he and his wife lived with his brother and his father. And so when we entered the house, they spoke, but it was obvious they were not totally comfortable with us being there. They were white. But the guy who invited us over had a pure heart. And I wasn't there to visit with his brother and his father. There were Confederate flags all over the house, but I didn't care. I was there to talk to the gentleman and his wife, with my wife, to try to foster a relationship with them. I didn't care about what his dad and brother believed in. And for him to even extend an invite to me to come to his house, he felt like I was bigger than that too. We visited for about an hour and we left. I didn't look behind me to see if the brother and the father were following us out of the neighborhood, because I knew the spirit and the heart of the guy who invited us over. You know, it becomes very hard for black folks to accept racism as what it is, which is pure evil. You know, we want to sit there and say it's power focused and power based. Okay, we'll go with that. But at the end of the day, it's still just pure evil. Because I'll tell you this. Money doesn't make a person good or evil. having money reveals if they were good or evil. That's why the Bible says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. It doesn't say of evil like we have our modern translations. The original translation is the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, not evil. Because if we read it in its proper context that we see today, where it say money is the love of evil, that means everything that's evil has a relationship to money, and that's just not true. So, in saying that, if you got an evil heart as a black person, you get some money, you gonna do the same thing that white people did with money. Ain't no need to argue about it because your heart ain't right. I mean, you have the incident that came out a few weeks ago where a white teacher forced a 5-year-old black kid to pick up the feces with his bare hands. That's evil. Ain't no money in that. That teacher is wicked. And then you have another school the other day where the white kids were all being served lunch first while the black kids had to sit at the tables and wait. And even in the schools, they separated the black kids from the white kids. That ain't got nothing to do with money. That's wicked and an evil heart. Excuse me. Now, I'll be honest with you. As a parent, the only thing that should have made the news with the 5-year-old kid was the parent beating the hell out of that teacher. And she shouldn't be allowed to hold a job in any company again until she purifies her heart and proves it. People like this actually belong on the outer rings of society. People lose their jobs over social media posts, but someone somewhere will hire this woman knowing what she's done in the past. And if that person knows what she's done in the past and hires her, that means that person is evil and wicked themselves. And as blacks, we also need to realize that the people that keep promoting racism to us are the same people who claim to be our friends. They started your NAACP. They started your Urban League. They financed the Civil Rights Movement. They financed the Black Lives Matter movement. They wrote Martin Luther King speeches. They owned 80% of the slaves. And they stole your identity. That's why they want to be close to you. That's why they want to keep the thumbs on everything you do. That's why they try to destroy any economic progress. Same people own most of your professional sports franchises. Y'all don't hear me though. Why is it we have so many whites telling us that we're suffering from racism, but those same whites haven't really went to stand for that said racism on our behalf? And as I get ready to close out, as I stated, all racism is based on ignorance. All of us are not racist, but we're all prejudiced to a degree. We base decisions many times on prejudgments. We like certain foods and not certain others because of prejudgments. We're attracted to a person with certain characteristics and looks because of prejudgment. These things don't make us racist. Those are just things that we prefer. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later.